Ghost of Tsushima has long been one of those PlayStation titles PC players hope to see, especially players in regions where the game wasn't officially available, since it was previously blocked in countries without PlayStation Network support. Even now, the game remains absolutely worth experiencing, as Ghost of Tsushima is still one of the rare titles that successfully explores the Japanese samurai theme. So how exactly was this game created? Let's find out in today's video. The development of Ghost of Tsushima began in 2014 at Sucker Punch Productions, a studio that at the time had only around 160 employees. And this was also when the company had just finished working on their superhero title, Infamous Second Son, and its expansion First Light. After 9 years working closely with the Infamous franchise and being associated with that identity, Sucker Punch believed it was time to step outside that comfort zone and move towards something completely new, which is why they began conceptualizing an open-world game focused heavily on melee combat, something they never had the opportunity to fully explore in Infamous. The team considered multiple settings, including pirates, Scottish outlaw Rob Roy McGregor, and even the Three Musketeers. All of them worked, but still felt like something was missing, until they discovered historical material about the Mongol invasion of Tsushima in 1274. And that was when everything finally came together. They even revisited a previously canceled project called Prophecy to reuse certain gameplay ideas, and in total the game would spend around 6 years in development, making it the longest development cycle in Sucker Punch's history. The Mongol invasion of Tsushima was selected as the main setting because the developers felt it was a recognizable conflict, where players could immediately understand the stakes. The Mongols at that time had one of the most powerful armies in the world and were capable of conquering most major nations. So placing a protagonist like Jin against such overwhelming forces made sense narratively. And to ensure authenticity, the team consulted Japan Studio, a Sony subsidiary, which supported the idea and helped arrange research trips. 10 representatives from Sucker Punch visited Japan and Tsushima Island to experience local culture firsthand. The trip lasted 11 days and included the presence of a Japanese historian guiding them. They visited Tsushima twice, once in summer to experience traditional festivals, and once in early November to attend the commemoration of the Mongol invasion on November 2nd, 1274. Japan Studio also helped connect the developers with historians, language experts, and religion specialists, focusing on 13th century Japan to recreate the setting as accurately as possible. Sucker Punch also invited samurai martial arts experts, including sword masters, to choreograph motion capture and act as combat consultants, ensuring the sword fighting style felt authentic. Initially, the team considered including real historical figures in the story, but consultants warned against it due to cultural sensitivity and the risk of backlash if inaccuracies appeared. Some historical inconsistencies still remained, such as Jin's armor being inspired by Sengoku-era armor from the 16th century rather than 13th century designs, because historically accurate armor looked too bulky and didn't match player expectations. Similarly, the katana was included, even though it wasn't historically accurate to that period, because it represents one of the most iconic symbols of samurai culture. Another suggestion during development was to replace the haiku side activities with waka poetry for historical accuracy. But this was rejected because haiku is more widely recognized worldwide. One of the core goals during development was to create characters with strong personalities that could evolve over time. And unlike the infamous series, Ghost of Tsushima does not feature a morality system. This decision was made so the developers could tell a more focused and coherent story about Jin's transformation from a traditional samurai into a different kind of warrior, someone willing to abandon the most fundamental aspects of honor and tradition in order to save Tsushima. Removing the morality system meant they could control the pacing of this transformation more carefully. However, instead of forcing players to make direct narrative choices, the game carefully designs how NPCs react to Jin's actions. Some characters support his ghost tactics, while others disapprove and criticize him.
I am not your son. I am the ghost.
These reactions create tension and make players think more carefully before deciding how to approach encounters. The developers wanted Jin's journey to reflect the idea of abandoning one's identity to become something new that better fits the era, delivering a universal and powerful message. But despite this narrative direction, players can still seamlessly switch between stealth-based ghost tactics and traditional samurai combat, because Jin's origins and identity cannot be completely erased regardless of playstyle. And another subtle detail is that even though the game has no morality system, the weather on Tsushima dynamically changes depending on how you play. Darker storms appear more often if you rely heavily on ghost tactics, visually reinforcing Jin's transformation. The main antagonist, Khotun Khan, was designed differently compared to bosses in other action games. Although he is ruthless and responsible for the invasion, he is portrayed as a strategic general, attempting to conquer Tsushima with as little bloodshed as possible. Actor Patrick Gallagher joined the project in 2017 and prepared for the role by studying multiple films, including The Godfather, and also referencing his own performance as Attila the Hun. Although the game is inspired by real history, the developers still created a fictional narrative. Historically, the Mongol invasion ultimately failed due to a massive storm during the battle at Hakata Bay, and this detail is subtly referenced in the game. Jin's katana sheath features storm imagery symbolizing the typhoon that destroyed the Mongol fleet. Several samurai and ninja films served as major inspiration, including 13 Assassins and classic works directed by Akira Kurosawa, such as Seven Samurai, Sanjuro, Yojimbo, Redbeard, and Ran. The ending of Sanjuro directly inspired the standoff mechanic where players wait for enemies to strike before delivering a decisive blow. The team also tried to recreate the atmosphere of Seven Samurai throughout the game. They even contacted the Kurosawa estate to implement a black and white cinematic mode as a tribute, showing the team's respect for the legendary director. The manga Usagi Yojimbo also influenced the game. The protagonist of that series is a wandering samurai known for agile combat and solving problems for civilians. This became a template for Jin's fighting style, which emphasizes speed over brute force. Jin's name itself was partially inspired by the manga's creator, Stan Sakai. Ghost of Tsushima was designed to have a medium difficulty level. Not too easy, but not overly punishing. The main challenge comes from Jin being outnumbered by enemies who can defeat him quickly, while he can also defeat them just as fast. The developers wanted encounters to feel grounded and cinematic like samurai films. The combat system was the hardest feature to develop. Early builds used health bars, but testers complained enemies felt like training dummies, absorbing too many hits. This hurt immersion. So the developers redesigned the system so enemies fall after a limited number of strikes. Difficulty levels no longer increase enemy health, but instead make enemies smarter and more defensive. This created another issue where enemies blocked too often on higher difficulties, leading to the stance system, which allows players to break defenses depending on enemy weapon types. Boss fights were designed separately to ensure longer one-on-one duels. Stealth gear in the game intentionally looks darker and more intimidating than traditional samurai armor. This was a deliberate decision. The developers wanted players to feel the contrast between honorable samurai combat and the morally ambiguous ghost tactics. Fighting head-on as a samurai is more difficult, while stealth methods feel more efficient, but also more ruthless, reinforcing the narrative conflict within Jin. Ultimately, the decision is left entirely to the player. One of the studio's goals was to create a peaceful, open world representing feudal Japan. Despite the ongoing war, the game includes quiet moments where players can slow down and absorb the environment. The HUD was minimized significantly. Side quests were structured as smaller personal stories involving civilians trying to survive the Mongol invasion. These stories emphasize the human cost of the conflict and add emotional depth to the world. The guiding wind was one of the earliest artistic ideas during development, inspired by samurai films where wind and environmental movement play an important role. The team spent about 1.5 years developing foliage and environmental reactions to wind. Initially, traditional UI markers and compasses were included, but later removed to preserve immersion. The wind system encourages players to observe the world instead of following icons. It was also inspired by Shadow of the Colossus. And narratively, the wind guiding Jin symbolizes nature supporting his journey, referencing the historical typhoon believed by the Japanese to be a divine wind that destroyed the Mongol fleet. Although the in-game Tsushima reflects real geography, Sucker Punch took creative liberties with ecosystems. Each region was designed with unique visual identity, so players can recognize areas even from a distance. This artistic approach made exploration more intuitive while maintaining immersion. The art direction was challenging because the studio previously worked on Infamous for 9 years. Shifting to a grounded historical setting required a new approach. Games like Shadow of the Colossus and The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild influenced the minimalist style. Environments were designed to feel peaceful and calm, contrasting with the violence of the story. Jin's samurai armor was intentionally designed to appear more regal and heavy, while ghost armor looks lighter and more flexible. Some NPCs, such as peasants, use worn and reused samurai equipment collected from battlefields to emphasize realism. The marketing campaign began in October 2017, when the first trailer was shown at Sony's Paris Games Week presentation. After that, information was limited while systems were still being refined. The first major gameplay demo appeared at E3 2018. Ghost of Tsushima released in July 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sony also collaborated with Tsushima tourism authorities and Nagasaki Prefecture to launch a website promoting the island's real history and culture. The game received a Metacritic score of 87, earned perfect scores from several reviewers, including Famitsu editors. It became the third Western-developed game to receive such recognition. Yakuza series creator Toshihiro Nagoshi also praised the game. In March 2021, directors Nate Fox and Jason Connell were appointed tourism ambassadors of Tsushima Island. Commercially, the game became the fastest-selling new PlayStation first-party IP. It sold 2.4 million copies in its first 3 days, 5 million by November 2020, and 9.73 million by July 2022. And that was the development story behind Ghost of Tsushima, a project that began in 2014 with a relatively small team at Sucker Punch and went on to become the studio's most ambitious title, built over 6 years with heavy inspiration from samurai cinema and Japanese history. When it finally launched in 2020, the game quickly became one of PlayStation's most successful original IPs, earning strong critical reception, impressive sales, and even recognition from Tsushima Island itself, proving that Ghost of Tsushima wasn't just a game inspired by history, but one that helped bring global attention back to it. And with that, that's the full story behind the creation of Ghost of Tsushima.